Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe and turn on notification. Samuel always thought he knew Nora better than anyone else on earth. He would often say this, not aloud, but to himself. A silent affirmation of their bond. 12 years of marriage had built an intimacy that went beyond words. A silent understanding, he believed, was unshakable. It took a quiet pride in it. In the way they could finish each other's sentences, share inside jokes no one else understood, and spend hours debating the provocative art history theories she taught, and the volatile market analyses he worked on. It was, in his assessment, a perfectly balanced system. At 42, Samuel had a solid career. A senior financial analyst, specializing in market risk for a major investment firm in Denver, Colorado. His job was to find order in chaos, to predict and mitigate disaster based on data. He was good at it. Nora, 3 years younger at 39, was a tenured art history professor at the university. Known for her engaging lectures and her ability to make cynical undergraduates argue passionately about the merits of dataism or the politics of post-war abstract expressionism. They did not have children. A mutual decision, made years ago. Or rather, a decision he had agreed to. Nora had presented it as a way to invest more deeply in their travel, their cultural experiences, and a shared life, free from the responsibilities of parenthood. He had seen the logic in her argument, and concurred. It never felt like a problem. In fact, Samuel often repeated the narrative they had constructed. They had the freedom to be themselves, to explore the world together, without strings. Their friendship with Marcus and Chloe began naturally, almost inevitably. The four of them met 4 years ago, at a monthly whiskey tasting club, held in a renovated warehouse in the Rhino Art District. Marcus, a successful businessman of 44, owned a small chain of high-end bespoke furniture stores. He had a relaxed sophistication that Samuel found himself studying. He moved with an unearned confidence, as if the world was built to his specifications. Chloe, his 37-year-old wife, was a documentary filmmaker. She specialized in intimate, often unsettling portraits of subcultures. Her portfolio had already been featured in several independent film festivals. She had a way of looking at people, a focused intensity, that made Samuel feel like he was being interviewed, even in casual conversation. From their first meeting, all four of them clicked. Or so it seemed. Conversations flowed easily, covering modern art, global economics, independent film, and of course, whiskey. They started meeting outside the club. For dinners at sought-after restaurants, game nights at Marcus and Chloe's impeccably designed loft, and afternoon drives into the mountains. Samuel liked how Marcus challenged his views on economic policy, treating it like a philosophical game. Nora, for her part, was captivated by Chloe's stories of filming in remote corners of the world. It seemed like a perfect friendship, balanced, enriching. When Marcus proposed the trip, to a secluded resort, near Aspen, Samuel accepted without hesitation. 4 days, he promised. Of visiting craft distilleries, staying at a boutique mountain lodge, with time to relax and reconnect, away from the pressures of work. Nora was thrilled. She said she desperately needed a break. From the endless stacks of essays to grade, and the petty dramas of academic life. Samuel also felt the weight of his own deadlines. Of endless client meetings, and the constant, humming anxiety of a fluctuating market that ate up his weeks. The idea of 4 days with no obligations, just good food, great whiskey, and the company of close friends, seemed exactly what they both needed. A logical solution to accumulated stress. The trip began on a clear Friday morning. All four left Denver for the mountains. In 2 separate but matching SUVs, agreeing to meet at strategic stops along the way. Their first stop, a small batch distillery known for its exceptional rye whiskey. They walked through the facility, learning about the intricacies of fermentation and distillation, then did a guided tasting in the barrel room. Samuel watched Nora, laughing with Chloe, as they took photos among the towering copper stills. Her dark hair glowing in the industrial lighting. She looked so happy. So free. A freedom that, he now admitted to himself, sometimes seemed to exist in a register just beyond his own. He felt a wave of something he labeled as gratitude, for having her by his side. The lodge where they were staying was even better than the photos on the website promised. Perched on a mountainside, with a panoramic view of the valley, the place blended understated luxury with rustic charm, featuring individual cabins scattered across carefully landscaped grounds. Samuel and Nora's cabin had a stone fireplace, a hot tub on a private deck facing the mountains, and a wall of windows where they could watch the aspens tremble in the wind. They spent the afternoon exploring the property, walking the quiet trails, and talking about future plans. Nora mentioned she had been thinking about writing a book. Not an academic text, but something more personal. A collection of essays on the intersection of art and modern relationships. Samuel encouraged her. Of course. He said she had more than enough talent for it. As he recalled the moment, his encouragement felt genuine. At the time, everything felt perfect. The first 2 days followed this idyllic rhythm. They visited more distilleries, dined at a restaurant with a Michelin star, and watched the sunset from the resort's main balcony, glasses in hand. Marcus was a generous host, insisting on paying for most of the meals, and sharing expensive bottles from his personal collection. Chloe documented everything with her professional-grade camera, capturing candid moments that she said would make an incredible memory album. Samuel felt grateful for the friendship, for the quality of those days. Nora also seemed to be enjoying herself, actively joining conversations, debating politics and philosophy with Marcus, and exchanging book recommendations with Chloe. But looking back, Samuel could now see it. The subtle calibrations taking place. The conversations were never just conversations. Marcus would often steer the topic toward ideas of personal liberty, questioning societal constructs. He'd talk about how modern life imposes so many artificial restrictions on people. How we are conditioned from childhood to follow social scripts that don't always make sense for who we truly are. Chloe would then support his points with examples from her documentaries, talking about communities that lived by different rules. Nora, Samuel remembered, would lean in, her eyes bright with intellectual curiosity. She would argue and counter-argue, but always from a place of fascination. But isn't the social contract a necessary foundation for stability? She might say, only to later add. Then again, who defines that contract? And whose interests does it truly serve? Samuel had listened, but distantly, like someone enjoying an abstract philosophical discussion. He treated their words like he treated market fluctuations, interesting data points, but not something that would affect his own secure portfolio. He failed to see that he wasn't an observer. He was the subject. It was on the third night that everything changed. The system failed. After a particularly long dinner at a sophisticated French restaurant, where they consumed 2 bottles of Bordeaux and 1 of champagne, the 4 returned to the resort around 11 at night. Marcus suggested continuing the conversation in his suite. It was larger, and had a spacious balcony with a fire pit, overlooking the moonlit valley. Samuel agreed. Still under the pleasant effects of the wine, feeling relaxed and content. Nora grabbed a bottle of port they had bought earlier, and brought it along. Marcus and Chloe's suite was truly impressive. A spacious living area, tastefully decorated with minimalist furniture, no doubt from his own stores. A gas fireplace, already lit, and glass doors opening onto the balcony. They settled into comfortable sofas, the conversation flowing as naturally as always. Chloe poured the port into small crystal glasses. And the talk started light, revisiting the best moments of the trip. But slowly, the tone shifted. Marcus, swirling the port in his glass, picked up the philosophical thread from the previous days. He talked about how modern life, particularly monogamy, often forces people into a state of quiet hypocrisy. Chloe agreed, adding that she and Marcus had a relationship she described as radically honest, built on open communication and a rejection of what she called possessive, outdated norms. Samuel listened, still feeling that comfortable, intellectual distance. This was just talk. Interesting. Provocative. But ultimately, just words. Then Chloe said it. With a smile that mixed challenge and camaraderie. Marcus and I have explored opening our relationship. On a few occasions, she said. Her filmmaker's eyes, gauging their reactions. Not often, she clarified. But when opportunities have arisen, with people we trust and respect deeply. Marcus added that it had actually strengthened their marriage, because it eliminated the resentment that comes with repressed desires. Honesty is the ultimate intimacy, he declared. As if quoting from a self-help book. Samuel frowned. A flicker of unease finally penetrating the alcoholic haze. He looked at Nora, expecting her to share his surprise. Perhaps with a subtle eye roll. But she seemed fascinated by the conversation. She was leaning forward, her chin resting on her hand. Her expression one of intense concentration. That was when Nora said something that made Samuel's heart skip a beat. She commented, with a casualness that unsettled him to his core, that she had always found the concept of couples who could separate sex from love to be intellectually fascinating. Deep down, she posited, as if in a seminar, emotional loyalty is what truly matters, not physical exclusivity. The body is just a vessel for experience. Samuel stared at her, trying to figure out if she was just being intellectually provocative, playing her part in the philosophical debate, or if there was something deeper behind those words. Before he could process it, Chloe made the suggestion that would shatter the trip, the friendship, and his entire world. What if we tried it? Tonight? Her voice, calm. Even. Swap partners. No drama, no jealousy. Just four adults, exploring a fantasy consensually. The silence that followed felt eternal. Samuel felt as if the floor had vanished from beneath his feet. He looked at Nora, hoping, praying. She would laugh, say it was absurd. Tell Chloe she'd had too much to drink. She did neither. Instead, she bit her lower lip. It was a gesture he knew intimately. One he had always found endearing. He recognized it as a sign. She was seriously considering something. He felt a wave of nausea. Marcus and Chloe just watched them, waiting for a reaction. Their expressions, calm, expectant. Samuel forced himself to speak, his voice coming out rougher than intended. Are you serious, Nora? She looked at him, and for a moment, he saw hesitation in her eyes. But then she answered, choosing each word carefully, as if presenting an academic argument. I don't see a problem with exploring it, Samuel, as long as everyone is comfortable and communicates. The body is just a physical experience. The love we have is much bigger than one night of curiosity. Marcus nodded sagely. Jealousy is a primitive emotion. Evolved people learn to overcome it. Chloe added, it would be an opportunity for personal growth. For all of us. Expanding the limits of what we thought possible in a relationship. Samuel felt anger begin to boil inside him. Hot. And acidic. He looked around the room. At the three people who, just minutes before, he had considered close friends. He realized he was being manipulated. The trip, the intimate conversations. The philosophy about freedom and oppressive norms. It had all been preparation. For this moment. They had planned this. And Nora, his wife, the woman he loved and trusted above all else, was not his ally. She was a participant. She was suggesting he hand her over to another man, as if it were an emotionless transaction. A piece of intellectual fieldwork. And worse. She did it with the same cold, articulate logic she used to deconstruct a painting for her students. He stood up, feeling his temples throb. Grabbing his coat was an automatic, physical response. Something to do with his trembling hands. When he spoke, his voice was firm, but beneath it lay a tremor of barely contained emotion. You can do whatever you want, he said. His words clipped and sharp. I'm not part of this. Nora immediately tried to argue. Standing up and walking toward him. She said he was being narrow-minded. Conservative, that he was missing a chance to grow as a person, and strengthen their relationship through radical trust. Samuel stopped at the door. And turned to face her. What he saw on her face, a mix of frustration and disappointment. As if he had failed some critical test. Was what finally broke something inside him. I don't need to grow, by sleeping with my friend's wife, Nora, he said. Each word deliberate, and cutting. And if you do, then we don't share the same values. I thought we did. But I was wrong. He walked out of the suite, ignoring Nora's pleas for him to come back, to talk it through. Marcus tried to say something about him overreacting. But Samuel didn't look back. He hurried along the resort's lit paths to his own cabin, grabbed his car keys and suitcase. And 15 minutes later, he was on the road back to Denver. Alone. His hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The 3-hour drive was silent torture. A descent from the pristine mountain air, back into the murky reality of his life. Samuel mentally replayed every conversation, every shared glance, every knowing smile from the past few weeks, searching for signs he should have noticed. Now, they jumped out at him with painful clarity. He saw it all. Nora had always been fascinated by literature and art that explored non-traditional relationships. She loved the controversial work of certain modern artists. Passionately defended provocative films as masterpieces despite their content. And had recently read a book called The Ethical Slut, commenting on how intellectually liberating it was. He had always assumed those were just academic interests. The curious mind of a professor exploring complex themes. He had supported her intellectual freedom. But they weren't just interests. They were desires. Fantasies she had been nurturing. And she had finally found an opportunity. And a support system to express them. He felt like a fool. He had been living with a stranger for 12 years. The data was there all along. He just hadn't run the right analysis. Samuel got home around 3 in the morning, physically and emotionally drained. He went straight to the guest room, unable to even look at the bed he had shared with Nora. He could not sleep. He lay in the dark, listening to the silence of the house. A silence that now felt cavernous and hostile. He felt betrayed in a way that went beyond the physical proposal. It was Nora's philosophical coldness that hurt the most. The way she rationalized the disrespect, turning a potential betrayal into an intellectual exercise in personal growth. She had tried to optimize their marriage, like it was a flawed piece of code. Nora came home the next day around noon, brought back by Marcus and Chloe. Samuel heard the car pull into the garage, but did not leave the home office where he was pretending to work on some spreadsheets. She entered alone. Her steps hesitant. When she appeared in the office doorway, her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She started talking quickly. A torrent of words. It had just been a suggestion, a theoretical exploration. She never expected him to react so strongly. She didn't mean to hurt him. She had been influenced by the wine, by Marcus and Chloe's ideas. The excuses piled up, one on top of the other, forming a wall of noise he couldn't penetrate. Samuel let her talk, watching her with an emotional distance he did not even recognize in himself. When she finished, her voice trailing off into a hopeful silence, he simply said, "The suggestion itself was the betrayal, Nora. You thinking it would be acceptable to ask me that? That I would agree to watch you with another man, shows that you don't know me. Or, worse, you don't care how I feel." She tried to protest. To say he was misinterpreting everything, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. "I have scheduled a consultation with a divorce lawyer for Monday," he said, the words feeling foreign and heavy in his own mouth. "You can stay in the house until we sort out the details. But I will be in the guest room. I don't want to talk about this anymore." Nora began to cry then. Deep, shuddering sobs. She said she loved him. That it had been a terrible mistake. That she would never do it again. But for Samuel, the damage was done. The system had been corrupted. For him, love without respect was not love. It was just an emotional convenience. And he deserved more than that. The trust algorithm had returned a fatal error, and there was no rebooting it. The following days were a blur. Tense conversations, heavy silences, and Nora's tears. Samuel shut down emotionally, functioning on autopilot. He went to work, came home late, and avoided all contact. He moved through his own house like a ghost. Marcus called a few times, but Samuel blocked his number. Chloe sent a long, rambling message, explaining they never meant to cause problems, and that he was reacting from a place of unprocessed trauma. Samuel deleted it without reading to the end. The divorce process was formally started 2 weeks later. With no children, the most complicated part was dividing their assets. They owned the house, which Samuel had bought before the marriage, but it had been renovated during their relationship with joint funds. They had shared investment accounts, 2 cars, and 12 years of intertwined lives to untangle. Samuel's lawyer, a pragmatic 60-year-old man named Robert, advised him to seek an amicable settlement to avoid prolonging the suffering. Samuel agreed, not out of generosity, but out of sheer exhaustion. He did not want to drag this out for months. He wanted to turn the page as quickly as possible. Nora initially resisted the divorce, asking for couples therapy, for time to rebuild trust. But Samuel was firm. The foundation was gone. There was nothing left to build on. She finally accepted when she realized he would not change his mind. They reached an agreement. Samuel would keep the house, since he had made the initial payment and had deeper emotional ties to the property. In exchange, he paid Nora a financial settlement equal to half of its current market value. She took her car, and they split the investment accounts evenly. It was clinical, cold, devoid of the emotion that should have accompanied the end of 12 years together. But it was the only way Samuel could handle it. He treated it like closing out a failed portfolio, cutting his losses and moving on. The news of the divorce spread quickly among their mutual friends. Some sided with Nora, saying Samuel had been too extreme, that couples go through crises and he should have given her a second chance. Others, especially Samuel's closer friends from work, understood when he briefly explained what had happened. He never gave specifics, just said there had been an irreparable breach of trust. Marcus and Chloe tried to defend themselves on social media, posting vague statuses about judgment and people stuck in outdated paradigms. But it only served to push them further away from the social circle they had shared with Samuel and Nora. Interestingly, a few months after the divorce was finalized, Samuel heard through an acquaintance that Marcus and Chloe were also facing serious problems. Apparently, Chloe had discovered that Marcus had developed genuine feelings for Nora that went far beyond the consensual experience he had championed. There had been messages exchanged between Marcus and Nora after the failed trip. Messages Chloe found that revealed an emotional intimacy that completely contradicted their entire philosophy of separating sex from love. Their marriage fell into crisis. And the last thing Samuel heard was that they were in couples therapy, trying to salvage what remained. He felt a bitter satisfaction at that news. A confirmation. He had been right all along. The data did not lie. Nora tried to reconnect a few months later. She sent a series of long emails, saying she had made the biggest mistake of her life, that it had not been worth it, that she had spent the past months in therapy trying to understand why she had sabotaged their marriage. She said she had grown, changed, and now understood the value of what they had possessed. Samuel read the messages, but did not reply. There was nothing left to say. What she had done was not a momentary mistake. It was a revelation of who she truly was beneath the intellectual facade. And that person was not someone he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. The risk was too great. Samuel slowly, methodically, focused on rebuilding his life. He threw himself into his work, taking on more challenging projects that required frequent travel to other cities. The travel helped fill the void, avoiding lonely nights in the house he had once shared with Nora. He started going to the gym regularly, not to meet anyone, but to channel his anger and sadness into something productive. He lost weight, gained muscle, and felt physically better than he had in years. It was a tangible result, a measurable improvement in a life that had felt like a total loss. It was at a financial conference in Chicago, about 8 months after the divorce, that Samuel met Sophie. She was an urban planner, presenting an innovative project on sustainable city design. They sat together at the conference lunch and started talking. The connection was immediate, but different from what he had shared with Nora. Sophie was direct, honest, in a disarmingly simple way. When he mentioned he was divorced, she simply nodded and said she was too, that she understood how hard it was to start over. They exchanged numbers and kept in touch after the conference. His relationship with Sophie grew slowly, organically, without pressure. She lived in Chicago, he in Denver. But they talked every day. She had clear values about commitment and loyalty, shaped by her own difficult divorce. Samuel appreciated her clarity. The absence of mental games, or complicated philosophies about relationships. It was simple. They liked each other, respected each other, and wanted to see where it might lead. It took over a year for Samuel to finally feel ready to commit again. Sophie was patient, never pressuring him, understanding that he carried scars. When he finally asked her to move to Denver, she accepted. They rented a new house together, in a different neighborhood, deciding not to bring the weight of his past into their new relationship. It was a fresh start. A blank page, where they could write a different story. Samuel never saw Nora in person after the divorce was finalized. He heard, through the same acquaintance who told him about Marcus and Chloe, that she had left the university and moved to Seattle, trying to start over, far from the memories of Denver. He sincerely hoped she found the peace she was searching for. But he knew, it would not be with him. Some doors, once closed, should not be reopened. Some betrayals, even if never physically consummated, destroy trust in an irreparable way. Over time, Samuel learned to look back without the sharp pain he had felt in the first few months. The experience taught him valuable lessons about himself, about what he was willing to tolerate, and what was non-negotiable. He learned that loyalty and respect are not oppressive social constructs, as Nora and her friends had claimed. They are the very pillars on which genuine relationships are built. Without them, everything else is just theater. A hollow performance of intimacy, with no real foundation. He also learned to trust again. Slowly. With Sophie. She never gave him a reason to doubt. Never spoke about opening the relationship, or overcoming primitive jealousy. She was simply present, consistent, and honest. And that was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything Samuel had always wanted, but had not fully appreciated, until he lost it. Sometimes, on quiet nights, when Sophie was asleep and he lay awake staring at the ceiling, Samuel thought about the trip to Aspen. He wondered if things could have been different. If he had noticed the signs sooner, if he had paid closer attention to the subtle shifts in Nora's intellectual landscape. But then he remembered something his lawyer, Robert, had told him during the divorce proceedings. Don't blame yourself for not seeing what someone was deliberately hiding. As Samuel saw it, Nora had not revealed her true desires until she felt she had a safe opportunity. Until she was surrounded by allies who would validate her choices. There was nothing Samuel could have done to prevent it. What he could control was how he responded. And in that, he had no regrets. He had held on to his dignity, his values, his sense of what a marriage should be. He did not accept excuses, did not let himself be manipulated by hollow philosophical arguments, and did not let guilt make him question his own judgment. He simply walked away, processed the pain, and moved on. And in that, he found his own kind of victory. Life went on, as it always does. Samuel thrived in his career, analyzing and taming risk for others. He built a new life with Sophie, a life that felt stronger and more honest than the one he had shared with Nora. And though the scars never fully disappeared, they became part of his story. Permanent reminders that he had survived, learned, and emerged stronger on the other side. Some lessons are learned the hardest way, but they are also the ones we never forget. And Samuel, finally at peace with himself and his choices, knew he had learned the lesson he needed. That self-respect is never negotiable. And that some betrayals, no matter how subtle, deserve only one response. A dignified exit. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.